Hi, Jared. Nice to have you with us today. We have had a good time when we introduced you a little bit some time ago. And for those who don't know Jared, maybe you can a little bit introduce yourself, but to make it more complete, we have done actually a video of Jared's career. And if you are interested in a career in forensic or in incident response, I encourage everybody to have a look at it. So maybe before jumping in the topic, maybe Jared, a few words about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Guy. Great to connect with you again. Excited to be here. So again, my name is Jared Greenhill. I'm a senior director at Palo Alto, specifically Unit 42. So day to day, I'm involved with some of the most prolific incident response and digital forensics cases globally. I'm also an adjunct professor at George Mason University, where I teach in their Masters of Digital Forensics program.
Well, super. And again, have a look at the video. I think Jared explains a bit more in detail his career, and it's fascinating. So you'll see in the show notes where to find that video on our YouTube channel. Forensics, of course, is a very, I would say, specialized area. Even some people may say, but both of us have worked at Sony Corporation in the past, and we were facing. We were the target for a number of, let's say, well-publicized cases, whether it's anonymous or North Korean attacks and so on. And forensic has always played a very essential role into those incidents, and especially when you don't know what's happening to you, what was affected, how did bad guys get in, and so on. So that's a very essential tool to do so. And the other thing is, obviously, sometimes a forensic has a bit of a reputation, and it can, if you're not prepared properly, and that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to tell you why it's important and how you can be smart about actually making forensic affordable, whether you are an SME or a larger company. So the affordability or the right thinking or preparation is important to actually enable that capability. Maybe to get started, Jared, maybe the first thing is, obviously the question is, the basic question is, are you ready as it is now with respect to forensic and incident response? So maybe you can get us started on giving a bit of introduction or, answering the question, how to find out, am I ready? If I'm the senior manager or if I'm the board, how do I know?
Yeah, it's a tough question, Guy. I think when I start thinking about how to know, sometimes it takes an incident to really test the theory that you think you might be ready. So hopefully that's not the case, but a lot of folks and organizations find themselves dealing with an incident before they really test their incident response plan or their digital forensics capability in-house. I think as far as, if that's not the case, working towards going proactively in the direction of obviously an incident response plan, tabletop exercises that simulate a real life situation. That's one aspect. But then also from a visibility standpoint, when we think about forensics, we're probably thinking about, do we understand what our inventory looks like globally? So if there was impact to our business with regards to security, would we be able to touch or get a hold of the devices that we wanted to perform forensics on or incident response on? So I think those are some starting points that I try to frame a lot of the folks that I work with, a lot of my customers and also individuals that want to understand that question. I kind of start there usually.
So yeah, I can easily imagine it. I mean, the question about the inventory is like the oldest question in the book in cybersecurity, and I have not yet met a customer who has had a perfect inventory and, in general. And of course, maybe sometimes when it's about an incident, it is a little bit more specific. So the area is a bit more delimited. And it shows that, even though you want to do sophisticated work with forensics, you are enabled or disabled by the basics. So getting the basics right is very important. I think one thing maybe upfront before we go a little bit more in depth, we always talk about forensic and incident response. And in the mind of many people, they are very related or sometimes even, basically the same thing. How would you differentiate them just to be academically separating them?
Yeah, I'll try to break it down and kind of the ways that I've seen it personally. When we think about digital forensics, we're thinking about a full deep dive on whatever that system is. Maybe it's a Windows server, maybe it's a Linux web server, whatever that asset may be. We're talking about getting a physical copy of the system and digging as deep as possible, really performing 100% of a deep dive across all of the evidence that you have with regards to that specific system. When we think about incident response, we're thinking speed, right? So how do we triage? How do we answer 70% of that 100% of traditional full forensics? We want to say, is there a problem? If yes, what does that look like? We're trying to really get through it quicker, because a lot of times with an incident, we're dealing with multiple systems that are potentially impacted or accessed. So that's the high level. I think that it's really about speed and depth.
Okay. And I guess, in my mind at least, you have to have a little bit of an imagination or understanding of what the bad guys might have tried to do. So to have some idea where you should look. And of course, you can look everywhere, but having a bit of a sense of where to look first and what may have been the logic of the attacker helps to move faster, I assume.
Yeah, that's a great question. And a lot of times when I'm, teaching new investigators, or if I'm even working with experienced clients, we always want to look at what we know first, right? Like the incident, what was impacted, what do we think happened? And it's important to have a starting point, right? Because we're going to work, backwards and forwards from what we know. So a lot of times people struggle with, like, where do I start? And it's really exactly with what the incident was, how was it detected? How was it reported up? What do we know about it? And then again, coming up with a timeline and moving forward and backwards temporally to answer some of those questions to say, yes, there's a problem, or maybe no, there's not.
Well, maybe before we dig into deeper about, what does it mean actually conducting forensics investigations and so on, and playing together with incident response, or even preparing for it in a better way to be more efficient and also more cost effective in this way. I think maybe it's a good idea to start with an example so that people can imagine in more practical terms what this implies.
Yeah, I think so. So when I think about some of the major incidents I've seen this year with, Unit 42 and leading some of our most prolific investigations with large customers. So ransomware has certainly been a big issue since 2014 or so. It's been ramping up. A threat group that I've dealt a lot with over the last year and a half or so, a little bit less, has been Black Basta. They're one of the more popular ransomware groups that's very effective, very devastating when they get into an environment, right? Their ultimate goal is to get paid and then also ensure that through usually double extortion, meaning, if you don't pay us, you can pay us for a decryptor if we've decrypted your environment or encrypted your environment, or you need to pay us because we'll shame you publicly on our website that shows that you're a victim of our attack. So we've dealt with probably 15 of these cases in the last year and a half, and we'll say the TTPs or tools, techniques, and procedures are very similar every time, and they usually a forensic investigation is. So, we've tried to bring that in right away to start answering some of the harder questions around what was the initial infection vector, what were the steps in between, ultimately until usually data is exfiltrated, right? And there's a ton of pieces in between, but that type of threat actor is usually coming in through, in the case that I'll talk about, they'll usually come in through phishing, and they'll infect the user, and they'll get a piece of malware installed on the system called QBot or QuackBot. That's been in the news quite a bit recently with a publicized FBI takedown. But they'll usually start there, get a foothold in the environment. And this is kind of the case for the example that I'm talking about, where we have a global company, 100,000 or so employees impacted by this group. And generally, they came in, and within about a day or so, we're able to get inside the environment, enumerate the environment, and ultimately exfiltrate, many terabytes of data. So there's a lot of pieces in between, but where the forensic investigation and incident response lies is that we had to be doing that really quickly to, one, know if the adversary was still in the environment, and then two, kind of figure out how we were going to paint the picture and tell the story of what the attacker did, what they touched and exactly what they stole. So that's kind of the 50,000 foot view, Guy. Hopefully that resonated.
Well, I think particularly, on the one side, you have this kind of intrusion and the exfiltration of the data, and you don't know what was touched. And on the other hand, you may have crippled PCs, which you are, eager and keen to, reinstall. And to reinstall not only that they work, but also to be sure that they are free of any malicious code. So I guess in these cases, you also had a very, limited time window to conduct these investigations.
Yeah, there's a preservation phase, there's an investigation phase, and then there's a remediation phase, right? Ultimately, in a lot of these big incidents where, as you said, we need to understand what happened, but then we also need to, in parallel, help the customer get back up and running, right? Get business back. And in some of these cases, there's millions of dollars a day that are in flux if the business is down. So those kind of three specific workflows are always top of mind and usually run in parallel.
How much time, take your example you gave before, how much time do you have? A day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days to do your work, or hours?
It can depend, right? So I think we talked about the business impact, right? So it's ultimately a business decision, usually with, the victim's internal and their external counsel of what their kind of reporting requirements are, federally within the country that they're in, or even locally with the state that they're in within the country they live in. So there's kind of that piece, but ultimately it's always fast. It needs to be done quickly. Time is of the essence due to many factors, financially, legal considerations, and others. So in a very large incident like this, usually you're looking at a week or two to try to get everything investigated, but ultimately business is being, the restoration, remediation is being done in parallel. So there's not a cut and dry answer for this, but days to weeks, and hopefully not many weeks, is, again, very big victims. So it's not like a lot of times it's not small and medium-sized business where that would be much faster. But if it's a large organization you're up against, you need a little bit more time.
We talk about careers in forensics. It's I think one of the more exciting careers, because you don't know what you will do tomorrow, maybe as a result of what you did explain, but also you come close to the bad guys. You really have to investigate, use your brain to really understand what happened, and your creativity, I assume, even to grasp what the adversary was trying to do. One thing I wanted to a bit insist, we'll talk about cost in a minute, but you mentioned many times, so speed is an issue, yeah. So obviously I can, if something is happening, I can either, call the next one available, I can call the best I can find, and etc., etc. We'll come back to that a bit in a moment, but the point is there anything I can do beforehand so that when I, should I have my own stuff? Should I have an agreement with someone who would support me if necessary? Should I have a pre-installed forensic servers in my network to help a little bit the work? Is it because time is the most important part here. Of course, the depth of the analysis matters too. What is it I can do to make this faster?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think it's a little bit of all the things that you touched on. We started with talking about inventory earlier. It is usually unreasonable for every organization to know where all their assets reside, literally taking like a host name and bringing it back to like an IP address or where it's located. But at a minimum, let's think about just understanding where our crown jewels lie in an environment, meaning if the worst case happened, where would I be most sensitive to an attack, right? So understanding where my intellectual property or my key assets live. So I think let's leave it there for just inventory, right? That's important to really, because attackers are usually going to head in that direction, right? So that's one piece. Another piece would be, from a visibility perspective, understanding if endpoint detection and response software, EDR, can be deployed in an environment, right? So usually larger environments, this is going to be something that's needed because they're globally disparate, and you need to have the ability to touch a system to collect key artifacts quickly from, right? Triage, when I mentioned that earlier, that's what that's about. That's usually done with EDR. When we think about full forensics or deep dive forensics, we're thinking about physical images usually, or logical collections of a body of files to help us investigate. So generally we'll have, larger organizations will have an internal capability for incident response and digital forensics. So yes, they'll want to have instrumentation and tooling to do that, hopefully locally to an extent, right? Your information security team will be able to have a subset of folks that can look at that evidence and dig into that analysis, as an organization internally. And then kind of the last piece that comes to mind is having a retainer, right? Having a retainer with the incident response and digital forensics firm is important, because there's going to be times that you run into things that you can't handle completely, where you need to complement your internal teams with external teams that are well versed in incidents that maybe you've never seen before from both a depth and breadth perspective. Those things come to mind.
Well, these are very important things. So clearly, having, as you said at the end, a relationship with someone who is going to help you, having a proper inventory, having maybe even some internal capabilities, tools, or even people set up, and maybe a process to do it the right way. I think it's critical. And we will come back in a minute on the cost side, because it implies a little bit what we said, a little bit larger company. So, what can I do if I'm not that large company? What's a minimum which is within my reach is important. And I think, as you said, and I think also the one has to realize that it's not only the forensics team who has to do a lot of things in a very quick way, but if there's a serious incident, all the senior management will get pressure from the public, maybe from a regulator, to explain what happened, to explain what was affected, and when they will come back to normal business. So I think also finding ways to shield a little bit the investigation team from all that mounting pressure, especially if it goes on over a few days, is an important thing. That's why I think you mentioned that before, having a bit of exercises or drills to test to that, because it's not something we know how to do well spontaneously. We really have to put ourselves in that situation, says, how do we let the investigation team do their work, but still handle the press, and who is the coordinator. And so having, I think, a company-wide, more larger, not in just a security team or in it's the management team drills, but maybe including the major function of the senior management team, or maybe corporate comms or legal involved is important. Any comment on the pressure you are exposed to when something like that happens?
Yeah, it's I gave briefly the example of the large Black Bostic case that has looked very similar across organizations, both medium size and up to very large. I think the one thing that we have been moving towards at Unit 42 to be effective in these situations is a model that we call incident command, meaning that you have someone like myself or a fairly senior leader coming in to be the commander of the incident, especially when it's really large, because there's a subset of a ton of different tasks really that need to be done that we touched on, from investigation to remediation. And there's the legal aspects, there's PR, internal, external, there's regulations depending on what country you're in. It could be everything from GDPR to the SEC in the US that wants things reported now in 4 days or less. So incident command is kind of the direction I think that some organizations have been moving towards, especially when they reach out to a third party like Unit 42. They want somebody to come in and give them specific instructions on how to handle the incident. So that's been something we've been working to respond to some of these most prolific incidents and incident response scenarios that we've been facing, or our clients have been facing, that we're supporting.
Okay, clear. Let's jump now to the financial side. I mean, there is a financial side if I'm a larger company, and I may have some of the things you mentioned before to be ready, and I'm also exposed to more possible incidents. So I have many reasons. I have many more assets, and I have many more bad guys on the other side who may be coming after me. So maybe we can speak about what are the elements what are things we can do, not only to be faster, but also to be a bit more cost effective in that sense. So if I'm a large company, what are my cost elements and which are the elements I have to keep an eye on, and how can I be smart about them? Now, if I'm a little bit smaller company or an SMB, I may still face incidents, and I may, it's just depending on the business. I could be a target even, or I could be a nice target for a ransomware attack. While I'm an SMB, how do I have to think about organizing myself to make forensics cost-effective, I should say, or affordable?
Yeah, a lot of, and it's a good question. So a lot of small, medium-sized business or SMBs they still face the same threats that larger organizations do. I think when you're smaller, you need to be thinking about, even large or small, you need to be thinking about your business decision around and risk appetite for a cyber event, right? So you're doing the same things. You have an incident response plan. You have, hopefully you've been trying to perform some tabletop drills, some simulations. You've been proactively working towards, hey, if there's an incident, I need to be as prepared as possible. I think the main difference is with SMB, a lot of times due to budgetary concerns, they'll often have incident response retainers with an organization to, basically support them in the time during an incident. They often don't have large security teams. Maybe if they have one, it's very, it's just a few people, depending on the size, right? If you're really small, you might not have anyone at all. So you're looking to a third party to help you at the time of an incident. So incident response retainer is the first things that come to mind. And then another thing for SMB is, cyber insurance. So it looks a little bit different all around the world, but cyber insurance, there generally are policies that can support you, right, to lower your financial burden in the event of a cyber attack, right? So you have a policy, the policy will be set to a certain amount. Let's just say it's $1 million. You'll write it in a way that's commensurate with the coverage that you want. So, maybe you want ransomware coverage in case something happens to you. So you'll have a budget then that escalates as needed around an incident. And there's a lot of, incident response companies that, it's basically like automotive insurance where you have an accident, you have certain repair shops that are in network, right? So it's very similar with cyber insurance. So that's usually a big necessity for small and medium-sized businesses, Guy.
Sure, super. Thank you very much. And I think it's also two good topics to look into our future videos, because what shall I expect? What are the minimum requirements for a retainer? I think it's an important one and a very complicated topic where there's still, I think an industry which still has a lack of maturity is the whole insurance business. Yeah, it is still evolving, and because cybersecurity is not such a mature area by itself. Insurance came even a bit later, and it has become a big thing, especially because of ransomware. So, and some people, some companies try to get in, sometimes to get out. So I think it's also, being very smart in having a good partner in the insurance business is important, because you never know when you need it, and you want to know to what extent you're covered and what you have to do to be covered. They may put some constraints on you. But a quite clear explanation on getting ready in time, and also quite good explanation on the money side. And maybe to all the viewers and listeners, we'll try to dive deeper in those topics in any of the future videos. Any comment as we're finishing this video you would like to add, or any remark?
Yeah, thanks, Guy. We touched on a lot of things at a high level, standpoint. I look forward to having additional videos that dig in deeper just around digital forensics and incident response. We have plenty to talk about there. And then obviously from the threat landscape perspective, there's always evolving threat actors that are looking to do bad things, right? So the exciting thing about this line of work is that there's no dull moment. There's always some new innovative measure by a cyber criminal to for either financial gain or intellectual property theft. So there's no limit to what we can talk about. I look forward to digging into some of these additional topics and future videos. So thanks for having me today.
Thank you for taking us on this journey, and looking forward to the future videos. Thank you so much, Jay.
Yeah, my pleasure.